Hello, everybody. This is Nick Totaro, Professor of Information Technologies and Computer Science, Lakeland Community College. Let's talk about pen testing, subverting, firewalls, routers, and let's be really honest. It's our firewalls and it's our routers that are our first line of defense in the cyber world. Their firewalls do not like giving up their secrets, right? They're designed to prevent people from coming in or going into places they're not supposed to be. So they're well designed. And when vulnerabilities are discovered, the firewall people, the router peoples immediately go in there and try to improve things. So this is going to be a fairly somewhat boring video. It's going to be based upon a lot of knowledge that you have to acquire through research. The results you're going to get aren't the most exciting in the world. Actually, most of the results you're going to get, you're just kind of going to go, okay, aha. There's not going to be that, oh, I can now deep dive into this. It's just one of those things. We got to look at it as these firewalls are our first line of defense. If they're weak, we don't have defenses. So let's go up to my computer. Let's take a look at my little virtual network and let's talk about what we're generally going to try to do. You know what? I'm going to go over here. Here's my little virtual network. We have the public side. If you saw my video about firewalls, this should look very familiar to you. So here's our public side. Here's Godzilla. That's going to be our attacker. Godzilla's trying to get into the DMZ. Now for this video, we're only going to be concerned with this area of the network with Godzilla and Metasploitable and this particular firewall right here. Metasploitable, those who do not remember it or may not be familiar with it, it is a weak database, it is a weak server with a lot of exploits. I'm not using it for that. I'm not trying to exploit Metasploitable. I'm using it just kind of as a server that has a bunch of open ports to it. I'm going to be more focusing right here on this outside firewall. You're not going to see a lot of spectacular things. Let me again keep stressing that. And the things we are going to see, you have to really go in and deep dive and truly understand and do research, look up RFCs and look up what other people have discovered, what they have changed. It's interesting for some people. I find this stuff interesting sometimes, but other times you could potentially get caught in the weeds. So now let's go up to my computer and remember this little network here. We're going to have Godzilla. Godzilla's on the 192.168 network, and we're going to have our DMZ over here, 172.16 network. We will suspend believability or reality a little bit just to expedite things. This stuff takes time. I want to have a shorter video and not have to spend hours to kind of go through it. So we're going to suspend disbelief here a little bit. Let's go up to my computer. Okay, by now, if you've watched my other videos, you should be a little familiar with my Kali machine, my Godzilla machine. I'm going to do everything from here. I'm not going to worry about the other scenes. We're going to pretend that Kali is trying to probe the network. Now, we're going to assume Callie's on that public side of the network. And if I find out information, the first stop is let's find out information about Godzilla. And Godzilla is 192.168.0.3. What is the routers? What are the routes that Godzilla would take to go other places? So in that regard, I'm going to just type IPR. And down here, you know what? Let me clear the screen. Let me get it up top. IPR. If I had multiple routes, I would see this. I'm more curious about this right here. For this video, I'm concerned about that. That is the default gateway. In routing, what the default gateway says, you could have several different routes. You could have routers on your network, and If you have a specific route, it will go through that specific router. If your computer has not been told a specific route, it gets dumped off into what's called the default gateway. I don't have a route for you on this table. Let me send you over here to the default gateway. In this particular environment, it's fairly boring. I only have one route. It happens to be the default gateway. And sure enough, the default gateway is 192.168.0. That's the first place I would want to look for the firewall. Sometimes I use the word firewall and router at the same interchangeably. There is distinction. So in this video, if I hear the word router, you hear me say router, I'm really talking about the firewall. So the first thing I want to do is, okay, that's the default gateway. Can I talk to the default gateway? Well, there's several ways I can do it. One is I can go to a web browser and see if I can surf, see if I'm connected to the internet. If I'm connected to the internet, then I'm using the default gateway. But I'm not going to go that approach because my network's not connected to the internet. I'm going to do a simple ping. And believe it or not, that tells me something, right? Immediately you're looking at it and it says, yeah, it's telling you the router's not there. Not really. You'll notice it's just kind of hanging there. Sometimes when you do a ping, it says host not found, host not found, host not found. What's the difference? Well, by the end of this video, we'll understand the difference. So here's where we have to kind of get lost in the minutia a little bit. That is telling me a lot. Let me break it here. When a firewall is set up, it's normal to have every single port on that firewall turned off. And even the word turned off has a certain meaning to it. But it basically, we set up the firewall, somebody sets up the firewall, and every port is turned off. Generally speaking, there are two ways that they turn off the ports, or two methods for turning off the port. One is block the traffic. And you're going to see me do some things. Actually, we'll go up to the firewall and we'll take a look at things. Block means that the firewall basically takes that information and just discards it, does not respond back to you. And that's what happened here. So I can tell by looking at this, by doing that ping, don't use ping, ping is weak. By using that ping, that this device could potentially be up and running. I still don't know, but I do know if there is a device called 192.168.0 and it's not responding back to me, that's telling me that somebody blocked that ICMP package. The other way that we can turn things off on a firewall is called a reject. Now, again, here's where we kind of get lost in the weeds a little bit. A reject will respond back to the individual, to the computer. They respond back with a reject command. If you're doing with UDP, I think it sends back an ICMP could not found or something, but a reject does respond back. So we would potentially see traffic, not particularly right now, but there's a good chance we may see traffic if we were using a Wireshark or something like that. So block, the firewall will take that packet and just throw it away. It won't even respond to it. A reject, the firewall takes it, responds back to whoever made the inquiry. So the general belief is that the block is better because you don't want to provide information back. Now, years ago, there was a lot of rejects. Now, here's where the minutia comes in, okay? And here's where past history comes in. Many times the firewall manufacturers, the programmers, have now created an environment where if it is rejected by standards, I forgot, it's an RFC standard, but by standards, a reject has to send back that rejection package. But what the firewall does is it can potentially send back like garbage. It has to send back something, but it may even like forge what they call forge a block. So by the RFC standard, hold on. Let me pause. Let me look it up. I had to look it up because it's driving me crazy. But basically, RFC 793 says a reject has to respond with a reject package or a reset package. But a block doesn't. A block takes it. So again, here's where minutia kicks in. A lot of times they forge those resets, those acknowledgments. So even when somebody hits a block, even though block just takes it and throws it away, the router will say, okay, you want to query me? Here you go. I'm going to send you false information really intended to thwart some of this activity. So ping is not a good answer to this. But yet, is there a way to discover that if this particular IP addresses? Well, let's pull out our old friend Nmap. And we're going to do one of the simpler Nmaps. Clear here. We're going to do a search for life. And we're going to speed it up just a little bit. Now, even Nmap is saying couldn't really find something there, but it appears that that particular device was blocking the pings. So the router is providing some information there. Not the most exciting information. So Nmap says, why don't you try a -pn? Again, all we're trying to do is we are trying to see if that firewall is even alive. So you know what? Let's do that. And, well, okay, it took about 13 seconds. That's good. And it did find it. So the -pn did do some kind of connection, not an ICMP, but maybe a SYN or a I would have to look that up. So we know that firewall is up. We also know it is guarding its secrets. So the ping is turned off. That's not a big deal. A lot of devices have their pings turned off. The sync pin, CYN pin, that didn't want to work. So this is now guarding its secrets. Why don't we see if we can get a little aggressive here and use some of our knowledge that we have acquired with Nmap to see if what ports are potentially opened on that router or that firewall. Let's use the next one at our disposal, and let's see if we can find a three-way handshake. All right. So this one, I'm going to say ST 192.168.0.1. And again, we're going to be aggressive here because it's just a demonstration video. So a timing of 4 just means really, really hard. It's still saying, yeah, it's up. All right, a little faster on this one. Oh, but look, host seems to be down. No, it's really, if it's really up, it's try the -pn. Let's go even a little bit more aggressive here. Now this one says the -SS means it's the 2/3 handshake. So it's going to try to establish instead of using a 3-way handshake that we tried before, we're going to use the two parts of the 3-way handshake. We're going to do some banner grabbing. We're going to we're just trying to be aggressive here. Why isn't this device giving up its secret? Now, if this device has a IPS built into it, it's being alerted. So we need to suspend reality. I'm at the point where I am hammering this router. I really would do that. So I paused it, it came back. Again, it's not showing us any port. It's showing us different. The hop, that's not a big deal. Too many fingerprints match this host. So it can't even determine the operating system on this particular host. We happen to get a MAC address. Okay, that's interesting. So this is telling me the specifics. Now, if this was a real firewall hardware and we were able to get the MAC address, then we would have information associated with that specific manufacturer, and that would be another track that we would go down. This happens to be the MAC address of a VirtualBox, virtual machine. But now here's where, again, we got to have a little, you have to look at it a little bit deeper. And let's see, it does appear that the host is up. That's good. But right here, this line right here, it says all 1,000 of the first ports were scanned and they're in the ignore state. That is telling me those first 1,000 ports are just, many of them, most of them are blocked, and it's just ignoring the information. It's not sending anything back. So a majority of them are just blocked, right? So this is, again, not the most exciting material in the world. You have to read deeper into this. So, I'm pretty confident it's a firewall. Let's pretend that. I've gone through this. I've been very subtle, and I'm pretty sure it's a firewall. I remember taking a class and learning that oftentimes firewalls allow administrators to connect into them through a web browser. Poorly designed and poorly implemented firewalls would allow that to occur. So let's see if I can try to get into this firewall through just HTTP. All right. Ignore the history. It's going to sit there. And if somebody was silly enough to create a firewall and on the public side allow HTTP management of the firewall, shame on them. But I had to take this guess. Now, here's where I'm going to ask you to suspend reality a little bit, disbelief a little bit. I know there's a server on the other side. And let's say I have DNS set up. I don't have DNS set up because I just don't want to take the time. And I know the fully qualified domain name for that server. And through the act of using the fully qualified domain name of that server, I find the IP address of that server. If you remember my little diagram. So here's a little suspension of disbelief. I did a fully qualified domain name. I found the IP address of the server. So I'm going to use the IP address of the server I want to touch base with. And give it a second, and good. Okay, this is telling me a lot. And it's not just telling me I'm able to hit the server. It is at a minimum telling me that that firewall is allowing HTTP traffic, which means at a minimum, that firewall has port 80 open. Good solid chance that that firewall has port 443 or HTTPS open. So even though we could not discover what ports were open on that firewall, we know at least one, maybe probably more, 2 ports are open on that firewall. So if I can use a browser to go through the firewall to get to that particular server, which is a normal practice, right? We do that every single day. Every time you open up a browser and go surfing, you are going through firewalls. And those firewalls are allowing that traffic to go through. So none of this is nefarious. Also, the firewalls don't want to give up their information, but they have to do certain things. So based upon knowledge, I know some things about that firewall. I also have an IP address of a particular server. How about, well, look, I have a network address. Can I start scanning the other side of that firewall? That might be of interest. But you know what? Before I start scanning the whole network, why don't I at least scan the server that I know is up? So let's pull out our old friend Nmap. You can see how powerful Nmap is. So let's pull out our old friend Nmap. And I'm going to step through. I know it's alive. I know all that wonderful stuff. I'm going to be very aggressive with Nmap. And I normally wouldn't do this, but again, to expedite things, I'm going to be very aggressive with Nmap. Going to use the 2/3 handshake. Here's the address of that server. Again, I'm going to be aggressive here. I'm going to go up to 5. And sure enough, it came back with information. Now, by now, if you've been in my cybersecurity class, my ethical hacking class, even the forensic class, you've seen me do this before. But now there's more information here that we can dive into. So we just don't look at these values. So let's see where. Okay, it took a couple seconds. Not shown. 992 filtered TCP ports. Filtered versus closed versus not even showing up. That's intriguing. There is a difference between filtered, open, closed. Now, think of a firewall as a gatekeeper, and those gates basically are closed. They're blocked, meaning that anything that hits them that it rejects, or they're rejected, sends back, or if they are passed, meaning allow that information to go through. So have that in mind here. We couldn't see it with the firewall, but now we're seeing it with the device on the other side of this firewall. It's saying 992 of those ports were filtered. Huh. What that doesn't, that we don't filter servers. Where is the filter coming from? The filter is coming from the word filter is coming from the firewall side. Now let's take a look at these open ports. Some are open, some are closed, right? That's intriguing. If they were completely closed, for example, were the other 992, why aren't those showing up as closed? Here's where you got to use that thought process, that almost process of elimination here. 1,000 ports were scanned, only a handful of them are being displayed, and the ones that are being displayed either say open or closed, but yet the other 992 are just not even showing up. That is because the router is now providing information. Here's where we're gleaning information from the router. This is telling me through research, through understanding this material, there are ports on the router. Ports 21, let's go through this. Ports 21, 22, ports 80, and port 590. All these open ports are actually ports that are opened on the router. The router is allowing that information to pass through. Good. So now we know that there are certain ports on that router that are allowing things to pass through. We're not even talking to the router, but this Nmap is determining that based upon the connection that it established with the device on the other side. We wouldn't see this, right? So the opened ports on that device are also open ports or passports on the router. The closed ports, that is what it looks like when a port on the router is set to reject, right? It's sending that reset. It's sending that, oh, I'm rejecting, it's closed. the port was set up to do a reject. Suspend disbelief here for a second. This is a poorly set up router. I set up this router intentionally to do this. It's better just to block that traffic, right? Because if we block that traffic at the router, then we wouldn't even see these closed ports. I now have information at my disposal. I now can say, it's a poorly configured router that somebody made sure that all the other ports were closed or blocked, but yet for some reason, again, this is suspending disbelief here, but for some reason, they said reject on those ports. That's what that closed is telling me. So the 999, the 992 right there saying that's actually Nmap's telling us, this is interesting. Those were blocked at the router. Blocked, meaning any packets were blocked. The open were passed through the router. And then the closed means that the router was rejecting them and sending back acknowledgments. It's not the most exciting stuff in the world, but this is subverting the router. We found information about that router through this method. Let's go back and say, well, that's interesting. On the public side, I couldn't do the browser to see if somebody left the administration capability of the browser on the 192.168.0 side. I wonder if they made it available on the other side of the router. Remember, the router has, in our little environment, has two sides. It has the public side, it has the DMZ side. I don't know what the DMZ router, the DMZ firewall address would be. I can start guessing. Again, suspending disbelief here, I can start guessing. I'm going to guess that on the DMZ side, the router's address is 172.16.0.1. Let's go find out. And lo and behold, there it is. Now, I can't circumvent the authentication process, but what did I glean from it? I gleaned that on this is a poorly designed or poorly implemented firewall. They closed a bunch of ports on the public side, and they probably closed a whole bunch of ports on, don't know, we haven't gone back and looked at that, but they blocked the majority of ports. For some reason, they rejected a series of ports. They stopped the web administration on the public side, but they allowed web administration to the DMZ side because I can hit that server, the server I was looking at, I can try to see. It's a mess. It is a mess, and we would not really see this in the real world. Let me wrap some things up here. Not the most exciting video in the world. Not a lot of ooh-ah moments. The whole thing about this video was about gleaning information from a device that is not designed to gather that particular information or provide that particular information. So I couldn't do anything on the public side. At least that's a good thing. It allowed me to go through the router to get to that server. That's a normal procedure. But then when I began to probe that server, I began to discover things that not so much about the server, but more about the router by reading what Nmap was telling me. Nmap was telling me that, filtered, meaning that those ports were all blocked. Closed, those ports were rejected. Slight differences there. Now, could I get through a rejected port? No. It doesn't mean that it's weak, that reject is weaker. It just means that it's providing more information to the bad actors of the world. We don't want to provide them information. So I still couldn't get through those ports. Let me make sure we understand that. But it's at a minimum, I know that's a poorly implemented firewall. Even though I implemented it, it's a poorly implemented firewall that probably has a lot of weaknesses. And then finally I said, well, can I administer that firewall from the other side? So I actually went through the firewall and came back to it to administering it. This is how we subvert firewalls. Again, not the most exciting video in the world, but when you're dealing with devices that aren't meant to give up their secrets, this is what we have to do. And we didn't even scratch the surface. There are textbooks and you name it associated with trying to glean information from a router. We barely scratched the surface on this. So that being said, at least I hope you enjoyed it. At least maybe give you a little better confidence of what routers are and what firewalls are. And with that being said, let's go out and learn something.